Okay, so we all love a sense of adrenaline. We all love to see great strength and competition presented to us. After watching an MMA match, you even get this high that makes you want to be a better person and just grow yourself as a better individual. I know I got that after the Conor McGregor fight itself. You should listen to me because I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about the fastest growing sport in America. Today I'm going to talk to you about MMA and its history. There are 3 points I want to go ahead and touch on. The history of MMA, how MMA affects its athletes, and where MMA is going. So, going on to our first topic, how MMA began, the history of MMA. To go and talk about that, we're going to have to go as far back as 648 BC. The Greeks. The Greeks introduced a form of MMA known as pankration, being a compound word, pan meaning all, kration, kraton meaning power. They used everything they had in these fights, sometimes resulting in 2-hour fights, and sometimes ending in both fighters dying due to exhaustion. Well, at the end of the day, if you ever had a survivor, the survivor would be turned into a warrior. The warrior would then go and raid villages, and then that led to expansion. Your next form of MMA was in the late 1800s, known as competitions. Many forms of mixed martial arts groups would go to these competitions and demonstrate that their form of martial arts was the best. Well, that led to the 1920s, where you had the Gracie Challenge, and the Gracie brothers, originating in Brazil, began to dominate the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu form of art and challenge the world by traveling and putting down on the table saying, hey, here are $100,000. If you can beat my form of martial arts, all right, that's your money. Only a handful of people ever did that. Then you go into 1960, Bruce Lee, the first person to ever go and challenge it, being the first person to ever integrate the form of martial arts, as his form of philosophy was, if you were a well-rounded fighter in more than one martial art, you were the better fighter than the person who only dominated one martial art, because it's social Darwinism that he believed in, survival of the fittest. Well, because of that, you had the first fight in 1993 where the Gracie brothers dominated due to submission. Submission was the only way the UFC ever began, because striking was really detrimental to your body. You could break your knuckles, and if just punching someone in the head, using your most fragile part of your body to punch the strongest part of your body. That was very detrimental. They didn't have gloves back then. So that leads me on to my next point, where how it affects our athletes. It was one of the most violent sports that were ever introduced back then, and because of that, it was one of the most detrimental. U.S. authorities ever always had to go into these type of fights and try to enact laws. In 36 of these states, they enacted laws that prohibited no-rule fights. In the early stages of MMA and the UFC, they didn't have any laws that prohibited violence from it. They only had 2 things: no eye gouging, no biting. That was it. Well, because of that, a lot of people didn't really watch, because all you resulted to were to submissions, and nobody really wanted to see anyone get submitted. So then they resulted in adding gloves into the fights themselves. Well, adding gloves then brought in knockouts. Knockouts then brought in head trauma. Statistics show that head trauma was really inclined during the 2001 year, where gloves were really introduced into MMA and UFC itself, and it really showed that it could be a little more damaging than football itself, because all you're doing is taking blows to the head. Well, going off of that, as soon as you get knockouts, you're going to go ahead and start having a higher viewership. In 2001, UFC was brought into pay-per-view, bringing its rise in the world's view, just rising and inclining. In 2001, the UFC was seen as the fastest growing sport in America. In my eyes, I see UFC as being the fastest growing sport in the world, only because it touches on many different countries, not only America. It goes into Asia, Germany, the Philippines. It goes as far as even Australia. And this is one of the main sports that they play in these countries. And I see it as being growing because it touches on both genders as well. It touches on males and females, and you have both sides of the sport just dominating. Well, today I did go in and talk to you guys about the history of MMA, and the 3 points that we touched on were how it started, how it affected the athletes themselves, and where it's going. At the end of the day, as college students, we all want to know the ins and outs of what's going on social media and what's growing. Well, I'm here to tell you that UFC is the next thing that's growing in our generation. Thank you.